Morning, everyone, and welcome to our Doors Open Day, a weekend of different talks and chats with different members of staff. My name's Lorna Steele. I'm the Community Engagement Officer for the Highland Archive Service, so you'll have heard me a little while ago doing the live introduction to this series of films. And the first film that's going out live today, this Saturday, is with Jennifer Johnstone, who is one of our archivists at the Highland Archive Centre. So I'll let Jennifer introduce herself while I get her presentation slides up and running.
Thank you. So my name is Jennifer Johnstone. I'm an archivist here at the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness. I've been a professional archivist for, I think, 12 years now, and I've been in this post for 2.5 years.
Great. Now, can you see that?
Yes.
Excellent. So as Jennifer says, she is one of the archivists at the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness. We've got 4 archive centres across the Highland Archive Service. So we have these 4 showing on the map here. One in Inverness, which is the Highland Archive Centre, which is the hub office. And that has the remit for Highland-wide records, but also for archive material from the historic counties of Inverness-shire, Ross and Cromarty, Sutherland and Nairnshire. Up at the top there, we've got Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives. That holds records for the historic county of Caithness, and will also hold the nuclear records for the whole of Great Britain as they become moved up there. We have Skye and Lochailsh Archive Centre over in Portree and Lochaber Archive Centre in Fort William. So together, the 4 of those make up the Highland Archive Service. Just because I know Jennifer's picture will have gone off your screen quite quickly, so that you can see her and hear who it is you're talking to. This is Jennifer. And she is based in this building here in Inverness, which is the Highland Archive Centre. Altogether, this building has 9 kilometres or 6 miles of shelving for the archive material, and that's the terracotta section of the building that you can see there. It's where all the documents are kept, and we'll go on to talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then on the left-hand side of the picture, our public rooms and our offices, and we'll chat through those as we go. Jen, can you tell us a little bit about what an archivist is? It's one of those jobs that when you tell people that you're an archivist, they go, and what does that mean?
Yes, I get that quite a lot. So an archivist looks after the historic records of an organisation or a company or a family, whoever they're employed by. So in our case, it's the Highland Council. We're the local authority archive for the Highlands. So it's predominantly the Highland Council and its predecessors. And once records have been deemed not needed for everyday business, if they are to become archives, if they're considered to have continuing historic value, they get moved over into the archives, and we look after them by keeping them in the correct conditions in the strong rooms, by cataloguing them and creating descriptive lists of what we have, and then by making them available to the record creators. So they're the council, they're still a business asset for the council, and also for researchers coming in. But we're also collecting archives. So it's not just the council archives that we have, we've got lots of privately deposited collections as well from lots of different local businesses, families, and some small individual collections as well that have been handed in to us.
Awesome.
That's
a total mix.
Yes, yeah.
And an archivist's job is to, as you say, collect those in and then list them, make them accessible to people.
Yeah, to look after them and to make them available for people who need to use them for research.
Awesome. So you touched a little bit there on how we get some of our collections. So some are kind of routinely transferred to us by the council, and some other organisations that we look for. A child once asked me at a school group, do we dig our collections up? Like, how do old records still exist? So I wondered if you would talk a little bit about some of the places you've got records from in the past.
As far as I'm aware, we've never dug anything out of the ground that we've got here.
Not yet.
Not yet. So yes, you said there that we have kind of agreements with the council and other organisations that they routinely kind of pass records on to us when they're finished with them. And if we are happy that they are to become archives, because we don't keep everything, that's one of the biggest misconceptions that people have. Another organisation like that is NHS Highland. So we're the holders for them. We look after their historic records, and again, material will kind of continually come to us as and when appropriate. Occasionally things like this will happen. If a department is closing or a business is closing, or moving properties, premises, we can quite often get called in and say, oh, well, we've got all this stuff, what do we do with it? So we have to go out and have a look at it, see what it is, and again decide whether it is appropriate for it to come to us or to go to another archive, or it doesn't need to be kept. Thankfully, this image doesn't happen too often. It does happen, but not that often.
Well, one of the things we always say, and you just kind of touched on it there, is that things are always at risk. Archives are always at risk where there's a moment of change. So if someone has passed away, or a business is changing hands, or there's a reorganisation, something like that, then those records are always at risk of being lost if people don't know that archivists exist to go in and have a look at them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another part of our job, is informing people that actually your records are important and you might want to consider them coming to us in the future, and we can advise on what types of records and material that they'll want to keep, and pass on to us. A lot of people don't realise the benefit and the importance of their records. So that's another important bit of what we do, is to help people and advise them on what we would like to see move into the archives.
And I think people don't realise that, such a range of things that we can do with them. And certainly people have said to me a lot, oh, yeah, but you wouldn't be interested in my things, it's just my granddad's notebooks, or my mum's diary or something. But we absolutely would be, because they are part of the story of the Highlands, and have so many uses for us, either with schools or with researchers or with academics, all sorts of different things.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing, is that you don't always realise what people would like to use them for in the future, and what kind of information somebody else might get out of them that you think, well, I'm done with that, that's fine. But actually,
yeah, there may be a benefit to somebody else down the line.
Yeah, exactly.
So what happens to a document or a collection then when it comes in? Someone approaches you and says, I've found this in my attic, or my business is closing, or whatever it might be, and they say, would you like this collection? What's the process of a record or a collection coming into the building?
Well, we have an initial chat with them about what the material is. If it's not Highland related, or if it would be better placed in another archive, we would advise that and ask them to get in touch with the other archive. We're really lucky that we have a purpose-built archive building, so we're really well set up for receiving material into the building, and all the different phases that it goes through. So the very first thing is we have a covered entrance at the back of the building, so that if it's raining, you can back your van up and safely get the boxes or bags of material into the building.
People never understand how excited we are about our covered loading bay.
No, it's really silly. So it comes in there, and it will go straight into this room here, which is our quarantine room. So everything we get in needs to go in there and assessed by our conservators, Richard and Carrie, who I know you're speaking to later, because there could be mould, there could be pest infestations, we just don't know, and we wouldn't want to put anything like that into the strong rooms, into the repositories with all the other material. So we don't know where, necessarily the conditions that collections have been stored in before they come to us. So they could have been in leaky lofts, or with somebody living with 20 cats with fleas and things like this. So it goes in there first of all, and will get checked over by a conservator. And there's a freezer there, you can see. Oh, sorry. So
no, I'll go back to the freezer.
No. and I know Richard and Carrie will speak more about this. I'm not sure. Richard, I think it is you're speaking to.
Yes.
So I know he will speak more about that, but things can go into there so that they'll mold will stop growing and it will die, and we can clean them up. So there are things that they can do. So yeah, on the next slide then, this is the conservation studio, which again is fantastic that we have this on site, and we have two professional conservators who we can ask questions and get all their knowledge. So it's fantastic. So they'll look at them, and if there are any issues, they can deal with it there before we do anything else. We're normally
things
quite lucky. Sorry.
Like you said, mold or infestation of little animals, or this is also where things go if they have huge tears or anything or need to be repaired. Yeah. Sorry, you were saying we're very lucky. We say that a lot.
We're very lucky that a lot of the material we get is fine. We normally don't have any problems, and with things that possibly do have problems, we tend to know about it beforehand, but we can't always be sure. So that's why we go through this process with everything.
And as you say, so fortunate, because so many archives are not in the position to have this dedicated space to check things over.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then, so once it's finished, if it's in quarantine or conservation, and then moves into our strong room.
Yeah, well, before it goes in there, it actually it will only go in there once we've worked on it, once we've catalogued it, once we know exactly what there is. This is where it goes when it's ready to be accessed by the public. So once we've created those lists and know what's in every box, we've put them all in archival boxes and folders and made them all nice and put them on the shelves, and then they're in there and people can use them. We know exactly where they are, and people can come in and request them. So yeah, this is one of our 4 repository strong rooms.
This is the wow point of the tour. In normal times I give a lot of tours to different groups, and this is always the room that people are blown away by.
It's always my favourite bit of a tour as well, when you're giving it and you open that door and people go, and you're like, yay, this is why we do it.
Without fail, everybody goes, wow. And you're like, yes, wow. And then, without fail, everyone wants to turn the handles.
Yes, exactly.
Obviously, the handles, they're movable racking to give us more space in the strong rooms. And as I said, altogether 6 miles of shelving. We have 4 repositories, strong rooms for our historic documents, and then 2 for semi-current records run by the registrars and records management team. And then, as you said, the reason for keeping them all is so that they can be used by either researchers. This is our lovely spacious archive search room in Inverness, or used in events, so talks and tours and school groups and all sorts of different things.
Yeah, again, we're very lucky that we have you, and we have a community engagement officer who we're able to provide lots of different types of activities and different outreach projects, and really showcase what we have and what we do. So
yeah, and again, something that's not all that common across the profession.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, everybody does engagement and outreach as much as they can, but we are fortunate to have a dedicated post.
Yes, exactly, yeah. And they're so well attended, and you can see school groups are there. And I remember I said this when I first started, I hadn't really worked with school groups before, and I'm always really amazed when they come in how interested they are and how much they get out of it. Yeah, they all come in kind of looking a bit, I don't know if I want to be here, and then once you get going, they're like, this is amazing. So yeah, it's really fantastic to watch people's faces when they are able to get their hands on things, as you can see in the pictures there.
I think that's the thing, one of the first school groups I worked with when I went into this post was a child said to me, but are we actually allowed to touch these things? Like, are we allowed to? Do you trust me to touch this? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, the fact that you've asked me that is good.
Yeah, exactly.
You can see the value of what you're touching, so that's excellent. But yeah, I think they are so fortunate to come in and be able to get their hands on real history and have a connection with it.
Yeah, definitely.
This is a bit of a big question. What do you enjoy most about your job?
Yes, there's a lot of different things, and it is, as we've kind of mentioned, quite a varied job. But for me, what I love most is the opportunity to get to know a person or an organisation or a subject in so much depth and detail that you might not have previously. When you're working with a collection, you've really got that opportunity. And an example from my career is I used to work at Tate Britain, and that was a cataloguing post. So I was there for over 18 months, but the first one was an 18-month project, and all I was doing was cataloguing the personal papers of an artist called John Wells. I had never heard of John Wells before I started. I knew nothing about abstract art, And I really feel now, after spending 18 months in John's world
with him, yeah,
listening to his conversations, to his correspondence with his friends, reading his diaries, looking at his source material and sketchbooks. He only had one nephew, and I think, so he didn't have any family himself. So I really sometimes feel like I probably know him better than anybody else. And I absolutely love that. You become very attached to the people who you work with in that way. And what I love now that I'm up here in the Highlands, I've now got this opportunity to all these other stories and people and organisations that I can now really get a good go at and find out all about them. So there's always something new to get, and that depth of information that you get from somebody or something is what I think I love most about the job.
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal answer and why you're in the right job. Okay, so I asked you, and for people who are watching, you'll see as we go through the weekend, everyone I'm interviewing, I'm asking them to pick some of their favourite items or things that have spoken to them in the collection. So I asked you to do that, and we're going to go through some of the records that you've chosen for this. So the first few slides are to do with our Highland Health Board records, records to do with Inverness District Asylum, as you can see at the top there, previously known as the Lunatic Asylum in the terminology of the day. So you've got quite an affinity with Health Board records, haven't you? You've worked with them in different places.
Yeah, I've worked with them before being here. So when I came here and realising that you had as I mentioned, the holders for NHS Highland, it's great to get my hands on health records again. So it's a great collection as a whole to have, because they cover the whole of the Highlands. There's lots of different hospitals, from big hospitals like Craigdenane and the Northern Infirmary to small ones, small cottage hospitals and sanatoriums that the records, there's not many records for them, but there's this huge range of material. Your Learn with Lorna talk on health was really good, and I would advise people to watch that to get a really good understanding of how progressive the Highlands were in healthcare, and these records, you can see that in these records as well. So the first thing I've got here is the first page from the Craigdenane or the Inverness Asylum admission register. So these records, this one is from 1864 when the asylum opened. This is the very first page, so you can see the numbers, patient number 1 down the side there. These are fantastic for telling you why people were put into an asylum. It gives you reasons that led to them needing care in this way, and then their diagnosis, so what their actual condition was. But what I love about them is all the other information that it contains as well. So you have, for example, you can see what people's occupations were. I love an occupation. I love knowing what people do. It shows you their ages. But also what I really like are, there's 2 columns which are previous place of abode and parish to which they are chargeable. So the previous place of abode is where the patient was living or staying immediately before going into the asylum. And the parish to which they are chargeable is the parish to which normally it's where they were born, and that is the parish that would pay for their care. Yeah, so they were the ones responsible for them. But what it does is it can show you how people were beginning to move around. Not everybody is still living in that parish. Some people are, have moved quite far. Some people haven't moved at all. But you can see all this kind of social history, and where people are going and what occupations they're doing in what areas, where they're from. So there's so much more in there, I think, than just the diagnoses.
Absolutely, yeah. And I would add 2 things onto that. One being that this image doesn't show the scale of how many entries there are in these volumes. The volumes, as you will know, are enormous and very heavy, and there are about 7 or 8 of them, so there are thousands of people's stories within these records. And the other thing I would add onto that is just that last picture that we saw of the secondary school pupils when we run the project with Melbourne Academy in Inverness, this is one of the series of records, as you'll know, that they absolutely connect to every time we show it to them. And I think that's because putting something in a context of a couple of hundred years ago makes it easier in some ways to talk about. So it's a way for people to talk about mental health at a distance, which I think is a very interesting byproduct of these records. So this is the next thing that you wanted to pick, again from the asylum records, this slide and the next slide, both from the annual reports. And just before we came onto this, you were like, I love annual reports.
I like an annual report, and I like a table, I like a statistic. So that combines quite well. So yeah, annual reports are, they were produced every year for the asylum, and they just give a kind of a summary of what was going on during that past year. Like most organisations do, producing annual reports even today. So again, you get some really, really interesting information. So they'll normally start with a kind of a roundup from the medical officer of how many people had been admitted, how many were male, how many were female, how many were discharged, recovered, how many died, all that kind of stuff that was going on. If high level members of staff left and were replaced, who they were replaced by, things like that, and all the kind of goings on in the asylum. And you get some really good information from them. So here the table, it's split into males and females. That gives you like an occupation. That tells you what people's occupation were. So that you can see the word singer. The street singer. This is why I picked this one, because I saw that and I thought, oh, that's a good one. So that there's like 9 labourers were admitted that year. This is 1912 to 13. And in the females, there were 4 farmers' daughters. So that was their occupation, was they were a farmer's daughter, which is quite interesting. So you can get quite a lot from that. And the second one, you can't really see very well here, but it's a table that shows the causes of death. So the patients that had died in that previous year, and this is from 1917. It kind of breaks it down into the different diseases or different, issues that people had and what they died from. So again, it just gives you quite a good summary of a snapshot of the asylum in that particular year. Yeah,
absolutely. And then the next one is fewer numbers and more words.
Yeah. So again, just some really interesting things that I found when I was looking for this. So the one that says general remarks, that's from 1915. And I just came across that when I was doing an inquiry last week, and I found it really interesting. It's just after the war had been announced, First World War, and it's the medical officer explaining how external events can impact and still affect the people in the asylum, the patients and staff. So it says, it is the common experience of every asylum physician that no event of startling nature or outstanding importance in the public life of the country takes place without awakening an echo and stirring up interest in the minds of his patients. And then the examples that he gives, the invention of wireless telegraphy, the working of the National Insurance Act, the loss of the Titanic, all such happenings are noted and become the subject of comment, and to a certain extent have an influence on conduct. And I just thought that was really fascinating to, how such a big national event, international event was perceived by patients.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and having a noticeable impact on people.
Yeah,
who are, I think sometimes there's a misconception that people got put into asylum and then were completely lost and everybody forgot about them, and they were removed from the rest of the world. But that very clearly says that they're involved in what's happening and it's having an impact on them.
Yeah. And that kind of leads on to the other extract there, which is from 1924, just to show the kind of different social events and different activities that the patients were taking part in. So they had a weekly dance during the winter. They had the Inverness Ladies Choir visited and gave a concert. A picnic, the women patients were taken on a picnic to Alduri Castle, and you can see at the bottom that the football club wasn't doing very well. They'd played 18 matches and lost 9 of them, and only won 4. So
that's great. They're fabulous extracts. And then something a little bit different from those two, but again, same sort of eras, 1914.
Yeah. I didn't realize that all my examples were fairly war related.
They are.
That wasn't intentional. So yeah, this is an extract from a diary of Sylvia Blaine. Some people might be quite familiar with Malcolm Blaine because we speak about him quite a lot, and use his diaries again, particularly with school groups and different groups that we have in. So the Blaines were a family from Windsor, and they had a family home in Nairn, so they would come up every year to stay in the home in their house there. And Malcolm kept, as a child, as quite a young child, kept these really amazing diaries, and we've got quite a few of them. But his younger sister Sylvia also kept a diary, and we have just 2 copies. I don't know how many she wrote, but we have 2. And this one is, you can see the date there, from 1914. So she was 15 at the start of the war. And it's really fascinating getting her take, her teenage thoughts on what would have been quite a daunting period in time in her world as well, what was going on in her world. So you can see there, European war began. I'm glad Mac's not a regular, so her brother Malcolm, Mac's not a regular or very strong, otherwise he'd want to go, though he'd hate fighting the Germans. But as we know, the sad thing was that he did go, and wasn't there very long. He died quite early on. And actually this diary ends, I've got it written down here, yes. So her last entry in this diary was on May the 9th, and it just says Malcolm left for France, and that was it. And then he died.
He died in September.
Yeah, so just a few months later. That was her last entry.
I think that is just, we haven't gone on to your final one yet, but I think that even just the ones you've chosen so far show such a good cross-representation of the sort of things we hold. So there's big institutional records, kind of run by the authorities of the time, but also things like this, a diary written by a 15-year-old, which is very, very personal, and talking about family and loss and fear, and that whole spectrum of things are kept in our strong rooms. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another great thing about working in archives, is there's such variety in what we have. Yeah.
If anyone is interested in finding out more about the Blaines, there's one of the Learn with Lorna's coming up is looking at Malcolm Blaine's life, and that is in September, to coincide with his death at the Battle of Lewes. So that will be coming up shortly. If you're watching this live, if you're watching it next year, maybe not. And then, so the last one that you had picked as your favourite document, again, war-based, but you didn't realise that.
Yeah, so when you asked, I knew you were going to ask me about what is my favourite. It's always a difficult question because there's so many things, but I keep coming back to this one. In other times when I've been asked what do I like, or to pick something, and I keep coming back to this. It's a really small collection. It's the collection number is D758, and it's Lars J. Scarpness, his papers, and it consists of a letter that he wrote, a 3-page typed document that he wrote, and I think it's 6 photographs that he included. And when I looked at it for the first time, the story behind it just really captured me. So Lars was, I'm just going to look at my notes to make sure I get all this correct. He was a sailor from Oslo, and he was just 18 in 1918. And his ship was torpedoed as it was going from Spain to Norway, and he was able to get ashore at Torquay. From Torquay, he made his way to London, and the Scandinavian Sailors' Temperance Home provided assistance. So him and some of his crew who survived went there for help. And when they were there, they heard that the government were looking for Scandinavian men to work in the timber yards up in the Highlands as part of the war effort. So, and quoting from his memoirs, which is the document that he he included with this, having survived 2 separate torpedo attacks, he didn't want to go back to sea. Fair enough. And so 3 of his fellow crew members signed up in May 1918 as they, quote, felt a longing for a holiday ashore. So they came up to Aviemore and started working in the timber yards here. And in the document that he writes about his time there, he describes this kind of overwhelming chaos that when he arrived, it was a very international camp with lots of different languages being spoken. And again, a quote that he says, it was a seemingly planless bustling to and fro of soldiers in worn uniforms. And then again, with regards to all the languages being spoken, he says, there is more difference between a Scot and a Cockney than between the Scandinavian languages. So it must have been quite a culture shock for him coming up, but they were there for a few months and then they left. And I don't know what happened to him afterwards, but his letter here in 1979, he decided that he had these photographs of his time in the camp. He didn't know what to do with them, and he realised that if once he died, the possibility was they would probably be lost, and he didn't want that to happen. So he put them in an envelope with this letter and his memoirs and addressed the envelope to the township of Aviemore, Scotland. And that was it. And it made its way to us. So again, that's a really good example of how a different way of how material comes to us. So
and how close things can be to being lost.
Exactly, yeah. These photographs are fantastic, and I know we've used them a few times as well, and I think they're really good photographs. I don't know if Lars is in them or if he was the photographer and that's why he has them. I don't know, but I'm really pleased that they're here, and I hope that I think that he would be proud to think that
we were talking about them.
Yeah, and his part in the Highland history is secure now. So.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's what it's all about. And interesting that still in Aviemore and Glenmore, where the camp was, they still have that connection with Norway and have events to mark the Norwegians' assistance in that. So that from the town's point of view, that relationship is still remembered as well. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you one last question, which I haven't told you about, so I'm sorry about this. Why do you think archives matter? I mean, we're going through a kind of chaotic time in the world at the moment, and there's so many pressures on people's minds and different things people are prioritising. But why is it still important that we keep archives, that we look after them, that we share them?
Yeah, I think it is really important because they're a part of all of us. They're all our shared history, and our shared history and identity, and they give us that sense of belonging to a particular place. You get those ties to a place or an organisation if you worked in a particular business. So they give everybody that sense of importance and shared history. And we learn from the past. So I think the records that we're capturing today, the records that are created at the moment, in 100 years' time, people will be able to learn from them, hopefully, and see maybe what we did wrong, what we did right, and how that affected society at the time, and therefore what can we do about now in the future, how that can help them make decisions then. They're unique, they don't exist anywhere else, so if we don't keep them, all that information will be lost. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for chatting to me, and if anyone has any questions following on from Jen's talk, then please just comment in the boxes and we'll get back to you and let us know any thoughts you've had. Thank you.
Thank you.